4 November 1914, a wooden ship named Endurance cut through violent seas, heading for the most dangerous, least understood place on Earth, Antarctica. Aboard were 28 men, led by the polar explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton, a leader consumed by a single audacious goal: to walk across the Antarctic continent from coast to coast. No smartphones, no GPS, no modern rescue. Temperatures could fall to -50 degrees Celsius. Blizzards could erase the horizon, and the map itself was a guess. Shackleton's plan was stark and simple: sail through the Weddell Sea to Vassal Bay, land, trek to the South Pole, then continue across to the Ross Sea. A journey of 2,900 kilometers in roughly 120 days, if everything went right. It did not. On the 5th of November 1914, Endurance reached the last outpost of civilization, a whaling station on South Georgia Island, far in the South Atlantic. Local whalers warned of bad weather and heavy pack ice. They urged Shackleton to delay. He refused. By the 5th of December, they were deep in the Weddell Sea, and the warnings proved true. The ice was thicker, older, and more implacable than expected. For weeks, they edged along pressure ridges and flows, searching for leads of water. On the 18th of January 1915, the sea clamped shut. Endurance stopped. A week later, the men spotted a 15-foot-wide crack in the pack, 50 meters off the bow, one last vein of hope. For 3 hours, the engines roared at full speed. The ship did not move an inch. Men jumped onto the floe with ice saws and picks, hacking a channel. Futile. The ship was embedded and drifting 60 miles away from Vassal Bay, carried helplessly on a massive sheet of ice with open water blocking any walk to land. They would winter in the ice, months of darkness, storms, and unrelenting cold. The photographer Frank Hurley documented the siege: ice closing, grinding, crushing. On the 30th of September 1915, they saw the first cracks in the hull. On 24th October at 6:45 p.m., the floe split under pressure. A slab slammed into the ship, breaking the stern post. Water poured in. For 3 days, the men pumped, but the inflow outran their strength. With the mercury at -8.5 degrees Celsius, some tried to chisel lanes to release the pressure. Nothing worked. Shackleton gave the order no sailor wants to hear: abandon ship. On 27th of October 1915, a thunderous report shook the ice. The stern lifted 20 feet. The rudder and stern post snapped. The bow filled with water. The men had already left the ship. As the sea froze, ice weighted the bow, and Endurance began to settle. With it went Shackleton's dream of the first Antarctic crossing. They had no radio, no way to call the world. They were marooned on a drifting floe in the Antarctic Ocean. They inventoried life itself: 3 small boats, 1 sledge, limited personal gear, and about a month's rations. Space was so scarce that many slept on the ice, huddled for warmth. Resupply by passing ship? Impossible. No one sailed here. Shackleton rationed hope. Each man could carry 2 pounds of personal items. Shackleton himself dropped gold sovereigns and a Bible into the snow to set the tone. Nothing outweighed survival. Hurley had to choose 150 of his 400 negatives, the images that would later astonish the world. Food dwindled. The sled dogs' pups were shot, an awful necessity. Attempts to haul the 1-ton boats across the softening summer floe won them barely a mile in 3 hours. Shackleton halted the slog and ordered a static camp on the ice while the current carried them. They called it Ocean Camp. On 21st November 1915, the pressure crushed Endurance at last. The men stood only a few kilometers away and watched their ship rise, groan, and disappear beneath the ice, like the final thread to civilization snapping. Weeks later, the floe drifted the wrong way, east, away from land. On 23rd December, they left Ocean Camp, tried to march, were blocked by open leads, and raised a new camp on another floe. Rations shrank to 1 biscuit a day, diluted milk, a little cocoa, and a smear of fatty pemmican. They hunted seals and penguins. Shackleton lied about stores to keep spirits alive. "Don't worry, lads, enough to keep us going." He knew the real battle was mental. To survive disaster, you need more than calories, you need belief. The crew's morale became Shackleton's chief ration, a lesson that applies far beyond the ice. A new year dawned. On 23rd March 1916, mountains loomed through thinning fog. Joinville Island, proof they had drifted far, far past Paulet Island, where a Swedish expedition had left rescue gear in 1903, ironically purchased by Shackleton himself. That cache was now behind them, walled off by unpassable ice. Ahead lay only two stepping stones before oblivion: Clarence Island and Elephant Island. Beyond those, the Drake Passage, the most violent water on the planet, with 12-meter waves, 20,000 dead sailors, and 800 lost ships. Even in the 2020s, giant cruise ships still roll and groan through its fury. If the flow carried them into Drake's Maw, the story would end. Hunger grew savage. For water, each man tucked a tin full of ice against his ribs to melt a few spoonfuls. Lips split, throats cracked. The crew officially numbered 27, but there were 28. In August 1914, a young man named Percy Blackborough had stowed away and was later discovered. Shackleton had warned him grimly that if the food ran out, he'd be first on the menu, a dark joke echoing the grim tale of Flight 571 in the Andes. It never came to that. They killed a sea leopard, yielding 1,000 pounds of meat, and, with deep reluctance, shot the remaining dogs. Food, for a time, would not kill them. On 7th April 1916, they sighted Clarence Island, some 83 kilometers to the north. Hope, suddenly real. Minutes later, the wind flipped east, pushing them toward emptiness. Their flow shrunk to 50 meters. Enough. Shackleton ordered the three boats, James Caird, Dudley Docker, Stancomb Wills, into the water to fight a way through slush, bergs, and breaking lanes. They managed to camp on another floe, and it split beneath them. Ernie Holness fell into the sea. In the chaos, the ice tore apart, sweeping Shackleton alone one way and the rest into the dark another. Over the wind came a voice, "Bring a boat!" They dragged him back aboard. Hypothermia threatened Holness. With no fire, Shackleton forced him to walk all night to dry his clothes by body heat. It worked. Targets shifted with every gust: Clarence, King George, Hope Bay, until Shackleton chose Elephant Island, the last rock before Drake's Passage, 160 kilometers to the northwest. As the flow drifted north, the air warmed to -8 degrees Celsius. The pack thinned and fresh water vanished. The men chewed raw seal meat for the blood to help them swallow. At 50 kilometers out, Shackleton committed. Into the boats for the final push. On the 15th of April, 1916, after 497 days afloat and adrift, their keels scraped land. Elephant Island, a desolate, uninhabited lump of rock, felt like heaven. Joy cracked quickly. Blackborough's feet were gone to frostbite. Rickenson suffered a heart attack, somehow surviving. Elephant Island had no inhabitants, no supplies, no traffic. They still needed a miracle to get home. Shackleton saw three options on the chart: Cape Horn, approximately 800 kilometers; the Falklands, approximately 880 kilometers; or South Georgia Island, approximately 1,300 kilometers. The first two meant rowing into the teeth of the Drake Passage. Shackleton chose South Georgia, longer, but with winds and currents more likely to help. He could not take everyone. He chose 5 men for the open boat attempt. The remaining 22 would build shelter and wait. On 24th April 1916, in a 6.9-meter lifeboat, the James Caird, they shoved into the world's worst sea. They rowed 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Rest meant being soaked, seasick, and exhausted, wedged under a deck barely high enough to breathe. April meant Antarctic winter. A few hours of sun, 20 of night. Those brief windows of light were everything. Worsley, the navigator, shot the sextant when clouds lifted to keep them on course. Twice, waves nearly flipped the Caird. Food existed, but eating required lying down to swallow. Once, Shackleton, worn to the core, found himself yelling at a circling bird. Anger born of endless cold and fear. Still they pulled. After 2 weeks, land signs multiplied. Close, and a furious storm struck. They let the oars go and rowed it out. Hours later, the clouds shredded. South Georgia lay 1 mile off. Every last muscle burned. They paddled anyway. On 10th May, 1916, after 3 weeks and 1,000+ kilometers of torment, the James Caird ground ashore on South Georgia. the same island they'd left 522 days earlier. Relief turned to a new wall. South Georgia is over 100 kilometers long. They had landed on the opposite coast from the whaling stations. Two choices: sail 130 miles back around in their beaten boat, or walk 29 miles over mountains that no human had ever crossed. The boat was wrecked. The decision made itself. Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and Tom Crean prepared for the crossing. They spent 9 days in a cave in King Haakon Bay, eating and restoring strength. Seabirds, seals, and penguins were plentiful. At 3 a.m., 19th May 1916, they set out light, without tents or sleeping bags. No map. Snow to the knees. They climbed peak after peak, scouting from each summit. When a route dead-ended in cliffs or gaping crevasses, they backtracked and tried another. 3 times they looked down at what mist had hidden. Arms of the sea, not frozen lakes. Fog sealed their retreat. Darkness blocked their advance. They roped together, cut steps into the ice, and descended a final brutal slope. At last, a whistle in the wind. The Stromness whaling station. After 36 hours of non-stop climbing, on the 20th of May 1916, the 3 men stumbled into Stromness, the first to cross South Georgia on foot. Not until 1955 would expert climbers, heavily equipped, repeat the feat. Bearded, blackened, clothing in tatters, they barely looked human. The station manager recognized the ghost before him. Shackleton, the man the world assumed had died with his ship. He tried to reach them 3 times in 3 months. Each rescue attempt was turned back by ice. He petitioned the British government for an ice-capable ship, was promised discovery, but weeks would pass. Shackleton couldn't wait. He appealed to Chile, secured the Yelcho, and on 25 August 1916 sailed again. Meanwhile, on Elephant Island, Shackleton had left Frank Wild in command. Wild turned the 2 lifeboats into a hut, led hunting for penguins and seals, and every morning said the same words: "Pack your bags, boys. The boss may come today." For 128 days, Wild climbed the hill to scan the horizon. Every evening he returned to camp alone. Blackborough's gangrenous foot was amputated, hope thinned. On the 30th of August 1916, a cry erupted. "There's a ship!" The Yelcho cut through the fog. Shackleton was on the bow. Against all odds, all 22 were alive. After nearly 2 years battling ice, ocean, and mountains, the Endurance expedition came home. "They welcomed us so heartily," Shackleton later wrote, "that they nearly pushed us into the sea again." Shackleton had left with 27 men and returned with 27. No loss of life, an outcome credited to his leadership, the crew's discipline, and their refusal to fracture under pressure. More than a century later, in 2022, researchers scanning the Weddell Sea made a discovery 10,000 feet down: the wreck of Endurance. In that frigid water, where wood-eating organisms cannot survive, the ship lay in astonishing condition. A time capsule, the name Endurance still visible on the stern. Today, on South Georgia, you can visit Shackleton's grave. He set out to become the first to cross Antarctica. That dream died in the ice. In its place, he achieved something even more miraculous: the greatest survival tale of the polar age.